Pranks often seem harmless. Small jokes, unexpected surprises, a laugh among friends. But sometimes, those stunts take a deadly turn. In this video, we're uncovering 6 of the most disturbing deaths that began as nothing more than a joke. It was June 28, 2014, in Bristol, England. In one garden, a few neighbors laughed as they arranged decorations under a sagging gazebo. Nothing looked dangerous, just bunting, balloons, and an oversized plastic archway borrowed from a wedding hire company. Helen Archer, 67, was sitting nearby on a folding chair with a cardigan over her shoulders. She had taught primary school for 3 decades and was known locally for her patience and her soft voice that still carried a trace of the classroom. Since her husband's death 2 years earlier, she'd kept herself busy tending flowers and hosting small neighborhood teas. When the volunteer group asked to use her garden for a surprise anniversary celebration, she agreed without hesitation. She liked company. Despite her arthritis and shortness of breath, she refused help setting up, insisting she could at least supervise. Her physical frailty wasn't new, but her willingness to stay involved made her feel useful again. The neighborhood group, a few retired couples and a pair of younger volunteers, planned the event for a neighbor's 40th wedding anniversary. Someone suggested adding a fun surprise moment, a confetti cannon under the archway, for when the guests of honor walked in. The borrowed arch, intended for indoor use, stood nearly 8 feet high with weighted feet that weren't properly secured on the uneven flagstones. Helen watched them assemble it, occasionally smiling but never realizing how unstable it looked from the side. The prankster, a man in his 50s, wanted the arch to appear larger, so he added 2 helium columns and plastic panels tied with thin garden wire. By late afternoon, everything was ready. Guests began filtering in, bringing trays of food and bottles of cider. Helen sat just a few feet from the arch, waving and greeting people as they entered the garden. The man with the confetti cannon positioned himself behind a bush, aiming the launcher towards the path. The idea was to fire as the couple arrived, catching the moment on video. Several people had their phones out, laughing about how surprised the guests would be. Nobody noticed that one side of the arch had started to lean forward slightly under the weight of the decorations. When the guests of honor stepped through the gate, the man fired the cannon. The compressed air burst was louder than expected. A sharp, metallic, followed by a bright plume of shredded paper and helium balloons shooting upward. Startled, a few people screamed, but laughter followed quickly. Then the left leg of the arch jerked. Witnesses later described a slow, wavering motion before the entire structure tilted forward. Helen tried to stand, but her chair caught on the paving. The arch collapsed in one motion, the aluminum frame striking her across the chest and shoulder. Chaos ensued, people shouting, chairs clattering, the camera jerking toward the ground. Several neighbors rushed to lift the frame, but the tangle of pipes and balloons made it difficult. Helen's hands moved briefly, then went still. A neighbor called 999, while another attempted to free her breathing space. When paramedics arrived, they cut away the arch and began resuscitation. She was taken to Southmead Hospital, where doctors treated multiple rib fractures, internal bleeding, and cardiac arrest. But she was pronounced dead the next day. The coroner's inquest later found that the arch had not been anchored and had been overloaded with decorations. Footage from a nearby community center's CCTV and several mobile phones confirmed that no stabilizing weights or ties were used. The confetti launcher's discharge likely triggered the collapse. In the weeks that followed, the community fractured. Some blamed the man who fired the cannon. Others blamed the loose oversight of the event. Helen's granddaughter held a quiet memorial in the same garden, planting flowers beneath the spot where the arch had stood. A brief safety bulletin was circulated by the council to remind residents that even private gatherings must comply with event safety standards. The neighborhood group that had organized the party dissolved quietly, its members too ashamed to meet again. It was March 22, 2018, in a crowded residential compound in Lagos, Nigeria. On that day, a series of thoughtless prank calls had already been routed through the local emergency hotline, overwhelming the dispatchers and delaying response times. No one anticipated that one of these calls would indirectly cost a life in the very compound where chaos had been sown. Amaka Ease, 34, was a skilled seamstress who ran a small, home-based tailoring business. She lived with 3 children and her elderly aunt, who suffered from mobility and swallowing difficulties. Amaka had a meticulous nature, both in her work and her household, and was deeply protective of her family. She occasionally joked with neighbors and friends, but had a history of underestimating minor risks, often believing her presence could manage any sudden danger at home. Her days were long, alternating between sewing, errands, and caring for her household, and she occasionally recorded short instructional videos for local tailoring networks, seeking modest sponsorship from a regional fabric supplier. Her living environment was cramped and chaotic, narrow hallways, stacked furniture, and limited exits. Emergency services had always been slow in this part of Lagos, but Amaka relied on knowing the fastest routes to the street and kept basic first aid supplies close. She sometimes dismissed minor safety protocols, such as ensuring a second adult was present when cooking or lifting heavy objects, assuming she could handle sudden emergencies. The combination of her proactive nature and overconfidence in personal vigilance made her vulnerable in situations that demanded outside help. That afternoon, Amaka's aunt began to choke on a small piece of food. Amaka immediately began back blows while shouting for assistance. A neighbor tried both the 767 and 112 emergency lines, but one rang endlessly and the other returned a network error. Amaka continued trying to clear the airway while moving furniture to make space for intervention. Nearby, a local courier on a delivery route noticed the commotion. He sprinted to the junction to flag down passing police and patrol cars, but every unit was tied up responding to prank calls or minor false alarms. He saw Amaka's frantic movements, her face pale and strained, hands repeatedly slapping the aunt's back, while neighbors banged on doors and yelled for immediate help. Chaos and helplessness were evident. Time slowed, yet no professional assistance arrived. By the time an ambulance arrived nearly 30 minutes later, the aunt had already lost consciousness. Paramedics administered resuscitation, performing CPR and oxygen therapy, but the prolonged delay had caused irreversible hypoxia. Investigators later reviewed the dispatcher's logs, noting dozens of prank calls in the preceding 48 hours, many originating from the same youth group. Investigators traced many of those prank calls to a group of secondary school students using shared SIM cards at a local youth center. The cumulative effect of these calls had shifted priority and contributed to the fatal delay. The incident left neighbors shaken. Community meetings quickly turned to anger and reflection, recognizing how a harmless prank escalated into tragedy. The youth center responsible for several offenders implemented mandatory first aid and public safety workshops for the pranksters, ensuring they understood the real-world consequences of their actions. Telecom authorities also instituted stricter call screening and heavier penalties for serial prank callers. It was October 14th, 2016, in Queens, New York. In the apartment block on 37th Avenue, most tenants were winding down for the night. Down the hall from the second-floor landing, an old man sat alone in his living room, watching sports reruns. Outside his door, 2 younger men whispered, holding their phones out to record. Roberto Bert Morales was 58, a retired subway maintenance worker. He'd spent 30 years under fluorescent tunnels before taking early retirement after a mild heart attack. He lived quietly, collected his pension, and spent evenings at the local bar watching games with a few old co-workers. He had a weak heart and some shortness of breath, but doctors said with medication and less stress, he could live comfortably for years. He kept his small apartment in perfect order, ashtray cleaned, remote on the table, slippers lined by the sofa. The 2 men who called themselves his buddies were a decade younger, part of a newer crowd that hung around the bar. They'd filmed small pranks before, fake lottery wins, surprise scares, minor nonsense meant for laughs online. Bert tolerated them, sometimes laughed along. The idea for the fake break-in came up during a late evening argument about who could handle being robbed. Someone joked that Bert would probably drop dead from shock. The comment turned into a dare. They decided to sneak into his hallway and stage a mock burglary while recording his reaction. It was cruel, but they told themselves it would just be noise, a few laughs, and then an apology. By 10:40 p.m., the 2 men were outside Bert's apartment, hoods up, half drunk. One carried a mask, The other had a crowbar. They whispered and giggled, testing how loud they could bang on the wall before anyone noticed. The hallway camera later showed them pacing, building up nerve. They waited until a TV ad break echoed faintly through the door, then started the act. 3 hard bangs, 1 shout, the sound of the crowbar slamming against the door frame. Inside, Bert was likely confused and frightened. He wasn't expecting visitors. His building had been robbed years earlier, and the memory had probably left him cautious. He looked through the peephole but saw only movement, dark clothing, and the flash of metal. His pulse rose sharply. When another crash hit the door, he opened it halfway, instinctively bracing himself. The 2 masked figures lunged forward, shouting. The building's camera recorded the moment clearly. Bert froze, his right hand clutching his chest. His knees buckled, and he fell backward into the hallway, knocking over a folding chair. The 2 men stopped instantly. A neighbor across the hall opened her door after hearing the crash. She found Bert on the floor, gasping shallowly. The pranksters panicked. One ran for the stairs while the other knelt beside him, trying to shake him awake. A third resident called 911. Police and EMTs arrived within 5 minutes, finding Bert unresponsive with signs of cardiac arrest. Resuscitation efforts continued for about 10 minutes before he was transported to Elmhurst Hospital Center, where he was pronounced dead. The cause: sudden cardiac arrest precipitated by acute stress in a patient with coronary artery disease. Building CCTV footage, seized by investigators, showed the entire sequence. The 2 men were identified easily. Both had prior misdemeanor records. Prosecutors charged them with second-degree reckless endangerment and criminal trespass, standard charges under New York penal law for actions causing foreseeable harm without intent to kill. The funeral took place quietly at a local church. About 24 people attended, mostly old co-workers and neighbors. His widow, who lived separately after a long estrangement, refused to speak publicly or push for harsher charges. The 2 pranksters each received 3 years probation, community service, and a restraining order, barring contact with the family. It was August 26, 2017, on a narrow, winding road just outside Tagaytay, Philippines. The evening air was thick and humid, carrying the faint scent of nearby pine and smoke from distant fires. That night, a series of thoughtless stunts and prank ideas had already circulated among local teens and amateur filmmakers, setting the stage for a tragedy they should have anticipated. Renz Agapito, 25, worked as a part-time caretaker at a small resort overlooking the ridge and had recently joined a local film collective specializing in prank videos for social media. He had a playful personality, often volunteering for the riskiest roles in their sketches. He sometimes carried a sponsorship from a regional snack brand that encouraged creative content, and his Facebook page had modest but growing engagement. The roads near the resort were steep, narrow, and poorly lit, with minimal shoulders, no guardrails, and frequent hairpin turns, terrain that required careful attention from drivers and anyone near the edge. Locals often warned newcomers about sudden drop-offs and blind corners, but Renz ignored the danger, chasing the viral reaction he hoped would hit online. The technical demands of the setup were simple on paper. Renz would hide behind a tree near the roadside, wearing a white sheet, then jump out as a vehicle approached. 2 friends would film from a parked motorcycle several meters back. The plan relied entirely on precise timing, Renz's ability to retreat quickly, and the expectation that passing drivers would react predictably. That night, the group began filming around 11:40 p.m. Traffic was light, but the incline increased vehicle speed unpredictably. Renz positioned himself behind a tree, sheet draped loosely over his shoulders. The friends filmed, the engine of a passing motorcycle humming softly. Renz ignored the muffled sounds of cars approaching from the distance, assuming he could step aside quickly if needed. A gray SUV came around the bend too fast. Its headlights cut sharply across the road, illuminating Renz for just a fraction of a second. He stepped out, arms raised under the sheet. The driver swerved instinctively, tires scraping the narrow shoulder before overcorrecting. The SUV skidded sideways, striking Renz and throwing him several meters before hitting a concrete barrier. Nearby stall workers heard the metallic crash and rushed toward the sound. Renz was found partially covered by the torn sheet, motionless. His friends ran to him as residents came out from nearby houses. Responders and police from the local precinct arrived minutes later after one of the residents' calls. They found multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and blunt force trauma consistent with high-speed impact. The SUV driver, a woman in her 40s, sustained minor cuts and shock, but survived. Investigators later reviewed the friend's phone footage and skid marks to confirm that the prank had directly triggered the crash. The footage showed Renz stepping out just before impact, leaving the driver no time to react. Authorities ruled the case an accident caused by reckless imprudence resulting in homicide. A charge filed against the two surviving members of the film group. They faced both criminal and civil proceedings for contributory negligence. Renz's family held a private funeral in Cavite, attended mostly by relatives and neighbors. It was May 9, 2015, at a small temple in Kyoto. Volunteers were arriving early to set up the annual temple book fair, joking and carrying boxes of donations. Among them, a harmless prank, a thin layer of water spread across an entrance ramp as part of a reflection joke for latecomers, would soon take away a life. Keiko Sato was 74, a part-time librarian known for her meticulous organization and calm demeanor. She had early-stage osteoporosis, making her cautious with stairs and slopes, and she walked with a slight forward lean to protect her spine. She had spent decades cataloging local history books and volunteering at community events, driven by a sense of responsibility rather than adventure. She enjoyed gardening and long walks, but she was conscious of her physical limitations. Despite her prudence, Keiko had a habit of taking small risks to maintain independence, such as carrying crates or reaching higher shelves, trusting her experience over caution. Keiko had no sponsors or external pressures, but she had a personal standard to be reliable. She arrived early each year to help with the book fair setup, carrying boxes of donated books and organizing tables. The temple was known for uneven ramps, small steps, and wet stone surfaces after rain, all hazards she knew well. The prankers, two younger volunteers from a nearby college, had a casual disregard for risk, intending the water film as a light-hearted visual trick rather than a slipping hazard. They assumed everyone would see it and avoid it, but they hadn't accounted for Keiko arriving alone with a crate. On this day, the assignment seemed simple. Transport donations up a gently sloping entrance ramp and place them near the registration table. But the prank made it unusually dangerous. Temple's CCTV later showed Keiko approaching, focused on balancing her load, unaware of the slippery film. The volunteers who had applied the water were chatting near the corner, distracted. No warning signs had been posted, and the thin layer of water blended with the natural shine of the stone. The ramp's incline was modest, but combined with her limited mobility, it created a hazard far greater than any of the pranksters anticipated. Keiko stepped onto the ramp, her hands full of books, her feet placed deliberately. Her weight shifted as she adjusted the crate, and the water film instantly reduced friction. Her right foot slid forward, while her left foot tried to compensate, creating a sudden, unsteady backward tilt. Her crate tumbled against her chest, amplifying the motion. Temple's CCTV captured the motion in clear detail. A pause, a subtle lurch, and then her body collapsing backward onto the stone surface. The impact was immediate. Keiko's head struck the concrete edge of a low step with a heavy thud. The crate scattered books across the ramp, and the film reflected the overhead sunlight, highlighting the sudden, frozen chaos. Volunteers froze in place, some rushing to dial emergency services while others applied first aid. Paramedics arrived quickly, noting multiple fractures and an acute intracranial hemorrhage. She was transported to a nearby hospital, where she succumbed 2 days later, due to complications from fragile bones and blood-thinning medication. The prankers were inconsolable, publicly apologizing and cooperating with temple authorities. The temple canceled the remainder of the book fair and refunded all donations. A memorial reading was held in Keiko's honor, and volunteers established a community safety day focusing on fall prevention for the elderly. Over the next 5 years, a volunteer rota was instituted to escort older visitors during events. Ensuring her death prompted long-term precautionary measures and daily reminders of the dangers of thoughtless pranks. It was August 18, 2017, On a winding stretch of provincial ring road in Lombardy, Italy, cars moved steadily along the otherwise quiet route, unaware that a careless prank, a few reflective cones and a fake hazard sign, had been set up by teenagers hoping to film startled drivers. Marco Rinaldi, 46, had been a professional van driver for over 20 years. He transported perishable goods to the same network of restaurants along the ring road and knew each bend and incline intimately. Married with 2 children, he took pride in his work, rarely speeding and always checking his cargo and vehicle systems before departures. Marco drove a refrigerated van equipped with standard safety features, anti-lock brakes, reinforced cabin, and a dash cam. The cargo area contained temperature-sensitive foods, and sudden braking or swerving risked damaging the load. He had no sponsorship pressures, but there were expectations from clients and a tight schedule. Lateness meant lost contracts or complaints. Despite these pressures, he rarely cut corners, though he sometimes pushed speed limits slightly to stay on time, believing his familiarity with the road compensated for risk. That evening, he was on his routine delivery route, completing the last stops before the weekend. Visibility was limited on the bend where the prank was set up. The teenager's reflective cones caught his headlights at the corner of his vision, and the sudden roadblock prompted him to brake and swerve instinctively. He had no way to know the prank was staged, and no signs warned of the obstruction. In the seconds before the incident, he adjusted the wheel to avoid the cones while maintaining control of the heavy van. The artificial hazard had transformed a familiar, manageable road into an unpredictable trap. Dashcam footage from a pickup ahead captured the first reaction, a sudden stop as the driver saw the cones, tires screeching. Marco swerved to avoid rear-ending the pickup, maneuvering toward the shoulder, but an oncoming lorry emerged from the opposite lane, rounding the bend at speed. The van's evasive motion placed it sideways in the lorry's path. The sequence unfolded in under 5 seconds, each driver reacting to the last, compounding confusion behind them. Witnesses later described the impact. The truck collided with Marco's van on the driver's side, crushing the cabin. Multiple vehicles behind braked and collided in a secondary chain reaction, though none were fatal. Emergency crews arrived quickly after a call from several motorists, using hydraulic cutters to free Marco, but the intrusion into the cabin had caused catastrophic blunt trauma. His body was later examined at the scene, confirming unsurvivable injuries. Investigators reconstructed the scene using dashcam and traffic camera footage combined with witness statements. The teenager's prank was identified as the initial catalyst for the accident. Police noted that the combination of a dimly lit bend and the artificial roadblock created a hazard no skilled driver could fully mitigate. The teenagers faced prosecution for creating a public danger, and local media widely condemned the stunt. Authorities installed additional reflective markers and a speed camera along the bend. He was survived by his wife, Elena, and their 2 children, ages 9 and 12. His funeral was held quietly in his hometown church, attended by relatives, co-workers, and several restaurant owners from his route. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, click here for more.